Okay, that was an exciting kickoff. We now have a second policy to talk about. This is draft policy 2015-9, eliminating needs-based evaluation from section 8.2, 8.3, and 8.4. Should be similar to the last discussion, but more of it. I'll have Leif Sawyer come on up. Good to see you, Leif.
Thanks, John. All right, good morning. So like the last one, this draft policy is all about eliminating or changing how we evaluate needs basis for transfers in Section 8. Quick disclaimer, we have not done a review by ARIN staff or legal. The text for this policy proposal is in your discussion guide. I will not be presenting any of it here on the screen. We have done attempted to do some multiple rewrites of this text to clean it up. That will not be shown, of course, in the discussion guide. A simplified problem statement here. Of course, due to the NRPM Section 8 transfer restrictions, the ARIN can't always accurately or promptly update the registry database because they don't always know what's going on behind closed doors. There's a perception that there are transfers happening without any without a transfer market or without ARIN involvement, and so the database does not accurately reflect what's happening. A proposed solution is to eliminate all needs-based evaluation for transfers, thus allowing people to come in and say, "We made this transfer. Please reflect it in the database. Now we know what's going on." A lot of discussion on PPML last year and earlier this year. Very difficult to determine really what's going on. A lot of conversation, but not a lot of outright support or negative opposition. But there is a lot of concern with eliminating needs-based criteria in the community, as we've heard on the last discussion. There is a perceived unfairness for the little guys who don't have the economic pocketbook, large size pocketbooks to participate in this. Forward. So in the post IPv4 runout, how do we balance our competing goals in transfer policy, resource conservation versus registration accuracy? A couple of things to think about here. So a number of questions for you. How do we increase the participation of transferors and transferees such that we can keep our database up to date? And does eliminating needs-based requirements actually result in a more timely update? Or does relaxed needs like proposal number 7, does that help? Or what Jason mentioned, like /22 with no needs-based evaluation or a slightly different sliding scale? And in a transfer-only market, what IPv resources is ARIN conserving? And should the AC continue to work on the problem of database accuracy? So I encourage you to get up to the microphone and help further this discussion.
Thank you, Leif. All right, the microphones are open. Oh, and okay, give us a, let me get my sheet out here. So microphones are open. Please approach the microphone either online or here. And our first interjection will be from John.
So just a little terminology issue here. I actually think the registry is quite accurate, but there's a question of what people think the registry reflects. The registry reflects the party who has the exclusive use of the entry in the registry. Does not reflect, if you think it's a right to a routing table, none of you gave me the right to issue rights to your routing table, so there's no way an address block represents that. All it is the person who can update the block and who has the exclusive uniqueness of that block. So when someone says the database isn't up to date, what they're saying is that somehow they bought something, but they didn't actually get what is the IP address block, because the IP address block is in the number registry system, and that's in the ARIN registry. I just want to be clear here. We have people who are leasing addresses, and we have people who are doing options for addresses. But none of those change who has the rights and the title to the address block in the registry. So if someone comes up to the mic and talks about accuracy, I'll respond each time because I have to keep the discussion accurate.
Thank you, John, for that clarifying comment. So let's go to front microphone, please.
Scott Librand, ARIN-AC, co-shepherd of this proposal. To John's point, the attempt to make the database more accurate is not that the database is incorrectly representing what it represents. It is instead that the database is not being updated in a timely fashion by individuals who are engaging in economic transactions that will eventually result in transfers. Those transfers should be represented in the database in a way that should be visible to the public. What we are basically asking here is, should we attempt to solve the problem that council identified in the last proposal? Should we attempt to get organizations who control addresses in some way to update those in the database more promptly? And is this a good way to encourage that? This is not about whether ARIN is accurately representing anything or not. It is about whether parties in the market are coming to ARIN at the time that they do a transaction and updating the database. If we think that that is a valuable thing for the world to be able to know who controls what addresses, then the following up question is, how do we encourage people to come to ARIN more promptly?
Thank you. Again, approach a microphone you'd like to comment, either generally or there's some very good discussion questions, so feel free to pick on one. Rear microphone.
Jason Schiller, Google, ASOAC. Just to follow up to Scott's question, I want to modify that question slightly. And I think the question we're trying to really ask is not, should we record transfers that are done out of policy? I think the question is, should we recognize and encourage them? There are certainly some people that are doing transfers within policy. There are certainly some people that are doing transfers outside of policy, whether that's some sort of a lease, whether that's a permanent right to use, whether that's a future that will eventually be drawn down when within policy need can be shown. But I think in either case, the question really is, do we want to reduce the risk of these out-of-policy transfers and encourage more of it, or not? And is that good for the IP addresses, which are a public good for the community? That being said, I think the people who really want the database to be accurate, and that is to reflect who is the authorized holder of the address within policy, versus those who want it to be accurate to reflect who are the people that have the right to use for some contractual agreement outside of policy. If that's really the tension here, then I would put forth an alternate proposal, which is, why not record both? Why not record under ARIN policy, so you have party A who has address space under RSA, and they are the source of a transfer to party B, who is a recipient. Why not in the who is show that party A is the legally authorized holder and user of the address space, and they have an RSA with ARIN, and they have the legal framework with ARIN, and they have subdelegated the right of use of those addresses to party B, and record both of those pieces of information in the database, and let the operators decide, do they want to route stuff that's out of policy or not?
So, I may have misinterpreted, so you would not be in favor, at least as it's been written here, you'd rather see that direction?
It's hard to understand what this policy is really trying to accomplish. If it's accuracy, I would rather address it by changing what we record in the who is, rather than giving more legitimacy to these out-of-policy transfers. I think we have justified need policy for a good reason, and I don't want to encourage more people to go outside of the process by legitimizing it and reducing risk. So no, I do not support this policy.
Thank you, sir. Front microphone. Oh, 1 second, Dan,
Hey, Jason,
Jason?
just so I understand right, because what you were, the framework you were suggesting in this kind of split system, isn't that essentially, to some degree, what we have now? Couldn't somebody just do a reassignment to somebody else that they are, in a sense, using the space?
So my belief is post-June, when the new billing structure is in place, end users could decide to pay on what was traditionally known as the ISP fee schedule. I don't recall what it's called now. And in doing so, they would get the same services that ISPs get, which includes reallocations and reassignments. So it is my understanding that if I am an end site with an RSA holding address space with ARIN, and I decide to pay on the ISP fee schedule, that then I could reallocate or reassign addresses to my quote-unquote downstream customers, which is maybe just a specified transfer to a entity that is not getting transit from me.
So your preference would be maybe to take it out of the policy arena, or at least the NRPM PDP policy arena, and have it so that services that ISPs enjoy could be available to end users for the applicable fees. John, sorry, did I mischaracterize?
To characterize, Jason's correct, that it will be, with the new fee schedule, it's possible for end users to be able to do sub-delegations, and that would be one way to effectively record the assignment of a part of an entire block to an operational entity, even though you have the permanent rights. That's one way to do it. Another way could be the database itself could be changed. You could put an operational organization in if you wanted to record a lease of an address block. So it is possible. ARIN records who has the rights to the address block. The question is whether or not you want to encourage people to record who's using the address block, which is a different question.
So to answer your question, my preference would be that all transfers are within justified need. But if that's not going to happen, I'm not sure whether recording them is better for the community because we can verify and know who's actually using the address space, or is worse for the community because we encourage more transfers that are not appropriately documented and justified.
Okay.
So I don't know, I'm split on that.
Jason, hold on 1 second. We have a follow-up question here from the stage.
So if we wait until June and Party A acts as an ISP and allocates downstream,
Not acts as an ISP, pays on the ISP fee schedule.
well, anyway, subdelegates down to their customer a block of addresses. They do not have to do needs basis criterion between them, correct?
That depends. Does Party A want to get more IP space?
Want to come back to get more addresses.
Right. Assuming it's a completely unused block that they're not using.
I mean, that depends. Does Party A need to get additional IP space? If in this example, Party A is a legacy /8 holder that never wants to have an internet business or use IP addresses for anything, and they're never going to get more addresses, then that's correct. If Party A is an ISP and they have customers, they're growing and they're going to want to get more space, then under current policy, their space has to be efficiently utilized.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Questions? Just 1 second. Chris Tasset, anything in the queue? Hopper there? Okay. Kevin Bloomberg? Mike?
Jason? Sorry, I had one more.
Poor Jason
I
here.
think it's really important actually for the community to do the thought exercise on all of these different kinds of scenarios. You've used one very sort of, I wouldn't say extreme scenario, but I'm in talking with other people in the community, one of the scenarios that I've heard is company does a purchase, an asset purchase, right, a sale, whatever, and then farms out over time. They've got a /10, and over time they do a 12, a 12, a 12, as they fall into policy. How does that help the community? The space is locked up, need is being dealt with over time, but it is not being reflected as to who actually is using that space. So I'm just trying to understand that sort of scenario where I'm trying to understand where the need plays into this when it's locked up and not going to be usable by anybody else and is being brought into policy over time.
I have two clarifying questions for your scenario. Question one, when they draw down a /12 at a time, is it within ARIN policy meeting justified need?
We can work with that, sure.
And question two, is all the addresses that party B, the recipient, using registered to them in the WHOIS and properly justified?
The original space is completely unused. Legacy space, whatever space you want. It is going to a party who is then, because of ARIN's current policy, doing it over time. They're doing it over 10 years.
The question is party B using any of party A's space that has not yet been transferred and reflected by ARIN?
It's very possible. Who knows?
Okay.
So in the case where they are, that's out of policy. In the case where they're drawing down a /12 at a time and using it after it's been transferred through ARIN, that's within policy. The question, the remaining question, if I can boil it down, is how does it help to not reflect that there is some portion of a /10 which is being held for party B and being used for no one? And my answer to that question is futures are risky. If you buy a future from an organization that goes bankrupt, you lose your future. And I think if we legitimize it and actually affect the transfer immediately, then there's no risk of bankruptcy. The risk of doing these out-of-policy transfers is decreased, and there will be much more of it.
Okay, I'm going to go to John for a quick...
Kevin, did I answer your question?
Well, we're just going to go to John for a second, but I would ask, we're getting close to the mic closing, and if you are planning to speak, I'd appreciate for just my ability to time manage if you could approach a microphone shortly. John, a quick
Yeah,
intervention?
just to be clear, Jason, though, in the model where you have people reflecting these as subdelegations, you have effectively a permanent lease, and you have the original address holder permanently in the situation. If that was an organization that just wanted to transfer and go on its way, you actually still have it operationally involved. It's the main contact. It's getting everything from spam to law enforcement to abuse queries. And so in the case where the subdelegee is an actual ISP, this makes perfect sense. They're providing services. In the case where the party that's doing these subdelegations is purely an address holder, you've enshrined a certain operational model for eternity.
Okay, I think
I actually disagree slightly. I think that when you subdelegate the address space, you can also subdelegate the abuse contacts and the operational stuff as well. But I agree with the rest of your points, which is the party A in this example is now in this chain forever. And I think that they have to be, because that is the party that has the RSA with ARIN.
Okay. I think this thread we should just leave at. It's been a great discussion. If there is more, I would use this to remind you that we have the PPML mailing list where you can take this discussion 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It never closes. Microphones will be closing shortly. Stage right microphone. I got my order down. Owen's giving me a look at stage right, I said.
That's house left.
Sorry, Milton, again. Can we just get that microphone a little bit more up here? We're not getting anything up here, so if that could get a little more up there, but we'll speak slowly and clearly, we ask.
Okay, I can move to another microphone.
I think that might make sense. Might, if you don't mind.
I am suspicious of the quality of the mic you were at. I am.
Definitely nothing on the speak. No, just kidding.
Yes. Okay.
That's the Milton we know and care.
All right. So, yes, my name is Milton Mueller. I'm on the AC. I'm sorry to have to speak about this. I wish there were more people in the community speaking about this rather than AC members with well-known positions. But I think one thing that prompted me to come to the mic is that I thought that John's definition of registry accuracy was a bit tendentious. well, tautological would be another word, I think a more accurate word, that you're saying that if in fact the person leasing or offering an options contract is still listed in the registry and they're still under RSA, then the registry is accurate. But I think I think we're kind of being a little too cute there, and we're ignoring the economic realities of what's happening here, which is needs basis is a barrier to trading in the market. It's perceived as a barrier by many people who want and need addresses by some definition, are willing to pay for them, and they would be blocked by the application, the strict application of needs justification. Therefore, they do an end around. They go around your process, and they do these leases and options contracts. And so this means that the registry, in fact, does not accurately reflect what is actually going on with the address space. I mean, seems very simple to me. And the problem with that, I mean, registry, this whole debate is really about needs basis. It's not so much about registry accuracy. Accuracy is just one of the casualties of this anachronistic application of needs justification to a an empty free pool world. And I think RIPE has had this debate. I think we've been having it for several years. I think the tide is turning. Whether or not this policy passes, I think we're all beginning to realize that we have in effect a gray market, which is an end around bypassing the actual policy. And I don't think that we want to continue to have that happen. I think we need to remove all barriers to have people reflect what they're actually doing, to openly and quickly register what's happening in the ARIN whois, so that if needs basis is an obstacle to that, we need to really do something about that. That's my main point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Milton, don't run away quite yet, if you don't mind, John.
Amazingly, Milton, I have no view on the policy proposal either way, but I actually agree with a lot of what you said. There's no doubt it's an economic issue. There's no doubt that people are doing a workaround. That's all true. I just, when it comes to whether or not this is a workaround or whether or not this is an economic issue, I fully agree. However, I just want to reiterate, it is not a registry accuracy issue. If you fail to be able to qualify for a car loan and instead you lease, you don't own the car.
So
Short if possible.
that means that needs assessment is not actually being applied to these subcontracts and leases and so on. It's actually just going around the policy. So what is the point of the policy?
I don't know what the point, but the title's still accurate if it's not your name on it.
Yeah, and again, that's a tautology, isn't it?
Thank you to both.
I'm sorry, I have to.
No, kidding. Owen. Oh, so, first Owen, he, as you can see, has been a little patient.
Owen DeLong, ARIN-AC Akamai. You have an option to have policy or to not have policy. And if you're going to have policy that's not enforceable, then the benefit of the policy is reduced, but it's not necessarily eliminated. Unfortunately, ARIN's ability to enforce policy is very limited, and so we have to kind of live with voluntary compliance to the extent that we can get it. To the extent that we are not getting voluntary compliance, I do not find that to be a credible or legitimate reason to eliminate the concept of policy. This argument that because we can't stop everybody who takes a community resource that they are not entitled to from doing so, we should not have any policies on who can take a community resource is absurd in my opinion. And we continue to have this discussion and this debate. RIPE has opted to say that it's perfectly fine to legitimize graft, extortion, whatever other form of...
Let's not characterize that way if possible, but go on, please.
Okay, it's okay to legitimize the Wild West of do whatever the heck you want without any regard to the community. And that's their choice and their community has opted for that. I don't think this policy will actually increase participation of those who want to operate outside the system in operating within the system. There are plenty of other reasons that they may want to operate outside the system besides just needs basis. Needs basis is a relatively simple one to get through if you actually care. So I don't think it will result in more timely transfer requests and database updates. I don't think that it better balances the playing field. And I don't think, and I do think that ARIN is properly conserving resources and trying to channel them to those organizations with legitimate need, rather than having them gobbled up by people with deep pockets, regardless of need or regardless of duration of need. So I personally think that this policy should go the way of all the other policies that have been just like it in the past, and hopefully the community will continue to say no every time these come up.
Thank you. Okay, administration, if you wish to speak, I need to see you at least moving towards the mic in the next 4 or 5 seconds, otherwise we're going to be closing the queue. Okay, the queues are now closed. As I see no one moving, go to the rear microphone, please, and I could ask if the remaining speakers please get your points across, but if you can be as succinct as possible because we're running a bit over time. Thank you.
Mark Lindsay, Avenue 4. I'm in support of the policy. And if I stayed here long enough, I guess Milton would have made all the points I was going to make. So I'm going to kind of get to the one specific one that I think needs to be reemphasized. We transact in this space a lot. And to Owen's point, can you have a policy that ought to encourage people to cheat? And I think the answer is people aren't cheating. People are using the existing policy, looking at it, and structuring transactions to get what they want and still work within policy. But the net effect of trying to limit people's acquisitions to 24 months isn't working because they're finding other ways to control the space they want beyond that. So why have a policy that can be worked around fairly easily at the expense of having the registry not reflect what is truly being transacted? So you ought to just accept the reality that the policy is creating uncertainties in the transfer market that are undesirable for the participants a bit. Because as Jason points out, you can have the situation where there's some uncertainty if you have to worry about a long tail transaction, what happens to those parties. But those addresses today are not being used by the seller. So why not allow the current entity who's put money down, who's decided they can fund something for several years, not be constrained by an artificial 24-month limitation when they're not doing so in terms of their actual transactions? So if the policy is being frustrated and worked around, what's the point of the policy? If you told people, like, we will recognize your transaction by looking at you as an entity, validating the sources, validating the recipients, not put this artificial constraint, you will reduce the incentives people have to work around the registry. It doesn't mean they all will, but it certainly will be a certain number of transactions that will be much more transparent in the registry than they are today, because good actors behaving in their own commercial interests will be inclined to go to the registry because it's the best place right now for public recognition of those transactions. It's not determinative because people will do things. There's also pressure on dark transactions that are even beyond that. If the registry continues to put these barriers on, you're giving more opportunity for alternative registries to get light. Because people will say, I'm so frustrated with this 24-month limitation, I'd rather go to some other white pages and put it there, because at least someone can point to that and say, see, here's another source of information that says I am now the recipient or controller of that address space. So the more you try to constrain commercial behavior, the more people, good actors with commercial interests, will work around it, defeating the very thing you're trying to do. So my view on this is, you can continue to do the same thing you're doing now, keep needs there. People will transact in the way they have been. They'll be buying 4 or 5 years worth of supply, incrementally transferring it over. Serves no one in this community's interest to not have better transparency on what's really happening in that context. If you want to be in the dark, continually be in the dark about that, okay, but be aware of the consequence. You have a perception that there may be certain address space that's sitting out there being held by one party, but in reality, it's controlled by another. That, to me, seems like a bad outcome for everybody.
Thank you for the comment and support. Okay, we're running very tight on time, so John, sorry, Mark, we have one follow-up question, sorry.
Mark, one question. I just want to understand this. I think your point is well made that people are structuring transactions to work around policy. But I know that as long as the policy is followed, this is similar in some ways to the difference between tax avoidance, which is legal, and tax evasion, which isn't. People structure transactions to minimize taxes. That's not wrong, it's just optimizing your circumstances. My question is this. I know operational entities may engage in structuring transactions for a number of resources in order to meet their needs, but I'm not aware of any financial speculators who are doing it. The risk of a financial speculator who engages in a structured transaction is very different than an operational entity. An operational entity will eventually make use of the resources and can often show that they'll have need at one point or another. A financial entity potentially is someone who would engage in pure speculation, is potentially endangering their entire investment. Do you believe that the activities of the current policies are limiting financial speculation?
I think the answer is yes. There's uncertainty in the return, and one of them has to do with this idea that the ultimate user has to be in the public registry, has to be someone who has a need for the address space. So I think that that is one bit of uncertainty. The biggest uncertainty is the pricing curve. It is so unstable. How long is the market going to last? When do I cash in? How do I cash in? So I think the inherent instability of the market is a bigger deterrent from real money. But I will also posit, I'm not at all saying I know someone who's done this, but I can posit to you that there are workarounds to the existing policy that would allow the very thing you're talking about. Right? There's nothing that stops Goldman Sachs from going to an entity that has address space and say, I want to give you $5 million.
Keep names
sorry.
out of it if
I'm sorry,
possible.
make
I
the
know,
name up.
I know that was
Make- okay.
hypothetical, but
Bank A.
Bank A is much
Bank
better.
A has $5 million and says, here, a source C, you have a /8. I want to hold that. And when I tell you in 2 years to transfer it to D, you will do so. That's within policy. Speculators right there. There's money in this, there's liquidity in the system that's not being prevented by policy. So, but what you're doing is transactions between companies who are normally operating, you're putting this barrier on it, chasing speculation, which you're really not preventing.
So it's just, okay, thank you. We got to wrap up there. Very quick, the queue is I have it. Vint, I don't know if you still have an interjection that you want to make quickly? No? Okay. And Chris Tassin, any remote participation? Nothing on the con there. Front microphone, then and then rear, and then we are complete. Please go ahead.
Alyssa Moore with Sidera, I guess following on Owen's comments in the same vein there, is the solution to out-of-policy transactions applying more policy on top of it? I have a little bit of trouble with that, and I was kind of making the same tax evasion versus avoidance comparison as the last commenter was talking as well. So I'm just not sure that more policy on top of policy evasion is the solution, and ultimately it legitimizes the out-of-policy transactions that are occurring. So I think that there's something that needs to come ahead of this discussion before this discussion is even relevant. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Last comment, rear microphone.
Jason Schiller, Google, ASOAC. Owen mentioned the phrase leveling the playing field. And it seems to me that the most level playing field is the one that is needs-based, where everyone gets what they need for the next 2 years. The only thing that makes this playing field somewhat unlevel is the fact that navigating the process is difficult for smaller organizations and those who haven't done it before or regularly. And I think a reboot of 2015-7 can and will address that, and that is the appropriate way to address it. My concern is removing all needs bases will allow the organizations with the deepest pockets and the services that make the most revenue per IP address to concentrate the address base. And I am very concerned that if you take a specific market segment, that one player has deep enough pockets to outbuy the other players and dominate that segment. And that's not good for the consumer, and that's not good for IPv6 adoption. I believe that the current regime does limit financial speculation and financial speculators buying up address space. I also believe it's limiting the operators who think that they need a 5 or 10-year supply or 15-year supply of address space from buying up as much as they would otherwise. So I think it's good that we're minimizing this behavior. I would certainly prefer it to be zero, and I certainly recognize that it's not zero. But that's the reality we live in. And I think the very fundamental question is, given that there is some out-of-policy transactions occurring, with some amount of risk? Do we want to legitimize that and reduce the risk and encourage more of it?
Thank you. Thank you for all that. Okay, let's just, we have a few minutes first. Thanks to Leif for the presentation. Just give him a hand. So we need to, we are going to do a poll, unless just I'll give a quick, yep, we're still good for a poll. Same question as last time. Counters in position before excellent. So again, the question is whether the ARIN Advisory Council should continue to work on this proposal through the process. First, those in favor and those against, I'd ask those online to vote at their earliest. If you wish to vote in favor, please raise your hand nice and high. Nice and high with, please keep it up. Thank you. You may lower your hands. And those who are opposed to the question, please raise your hands. There we go. Just one moment, please. Again, those online, please indicate as quickly as possible. Thank you. Lower your hand. Thank you. Just one moment for the results. I guess I'll just do the public services. Snacks are next. My apologies for keeping you between that and snacks, but we try and find a balance between staying on time and not cutting off a very important discussion, especially on a policy like this. At lunch, don't forget to do table topics. There'll be a whole new set, or some returning and some new table topics from yesterday. Always good. Same ones? Same ones as yesterday, but new vibrant discussions. And we always know it's this is not the kind of venue people like to be. Thank you, sir, once as always. Okay, on the matter of 2015-9, eliminating needs-based evaluations for sections 8.2, 8.3, and 8.4 transfers of IPv4 net blocks. 105 in the room from the same distribution. 9 in favor, 10 against. This decisive information will be provided to the AC for their consideration.
Thank you.